Back in the good old days of the Cold War, when the world was fueled by paranoia and a questionable amount of leaded fuel, there was an unspoken competition. Who can build the best attack aircraft while all your designers are hooked on coke? The 1960s saw such hit nuclear bombers as the F-105 on the Air Force block, while the Navy rolled up with the A-5 Vigilante, essentially the jumbo jet of attack aircraft, clearly also competing to take up the most space on an aircraft carrier physically possible. Not to be outdone, the British and Russians entered the chat with the Blackburn Buccaneer and Sukhoi Su-7B, two planes that sorta looked like they were drawn by children on a napkin. Unfortunately, the skies were no longer so friendly for these flying steakhouses. With the rise of surface-to-air missiles, a new era of sky dodgeball began. Using advanced radar fire control to guide an array of surface-to-air missiles, most of these aircraft began plummeting harder than my views after leaving for college. The F-105 became one of the only American aircraft to be retired due to massive combat losses, and the Su-7B was a massive failure for other reasons entirely. It was kind of just a terrible aircraft. So we're going to dissect some of the features on these earlier aircraft and LARP as an early Cold War designer with our very own 60s jet. Many of the early supersonics of the Cold War were subject to all sorts of fascinating qualities, such as the tendency to kill pilots, the maneuverability of a school bus on a frozen lake, and having wings so comically swept back that they can barely keep themselves in the air at low speeds. Sometimes I ask myself, what were the designers of these aircraft thinking? And to answer that question, I decided to make my very own attack aircraft using the resources, the knowledge base, and the theoretical technology level of an early 60s aerospace designer. We'll be doing this in everyone's favorite abandonware, Flyout. Using its freeform editor and relatively accurate aerodynamics simulation, we built something that's more than just an airplane. Blurring the line between gaming and simulation, this aircraft was also a journey where I learned so much about air combat and ground attack during the Cold War. From its fascinating history, to fun puzzles such as figuring out how to evade the invisible wiggles flying through space-time, I wish to share with you the knowledge I learned while building this aircraft. So, ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you the GT-66 Javelin.
Warhammer 1-1, FOB Tower, you're clear to taxi via Alpha to runway 35. Good luck and Godspeed.
Nothing new to report. Hold on, we're picking something up.
Warhammer 1-1, entering enemy air defense zone.
Contact, bearing 030 at 40 miles. Angel 6 hot, ready to fire. Launching missile!
Damn it, enemy SAM smoke in the air. I'm evading.
Radar contact, moving out of launch radius.
I've defeated the enemy SAM, recommitting to engagement. Come on and try that again, PRH scum. Target locked. Magnum. Warhammer 1-1. Hostile air defense eliminated. Returning to base.
So, in order to make our own ground attack aircraft that's, actually time period appropriate, we want to look at the history and design of quite a few different aircraft, all of which were a good 5 years older than the aircraft we're building. This is in order to provide what I hope will be a logical progression in design philosophy. This is super important because do you know how many people just go back in time and go, look at my supersonic dead-doing World War II jet, I'm so cool and good at designing airplanes. And then you look at it and the design is super informed of modern aerodynamics and has a comically high thrust jet engine for some reason. It's a pretty common issue, especially in Flyout. Because these issues are so common, I'm going to actually present to you some information about other aircraft of the time period, or rather, the period just before the development, instead of just assuming I'm better than everyone else. The first aircraft on our list, the F-105 Thunderchief. Designed as the fastest low-altitude nuclear strike aircraft in the entire United States arsenal, the F-105 was designed with just a few highly specialized goals. Mainly, these goals were to fly low, to fly fast, and to carry heavy payloads. Despite some controversy existing in the later years of its development, the early iterations of the F-105 received great interest from the United States Department of Defense. This is thanks to its high performance and impressive weapons capability. One test for conventional weaponry citing just one Thunderchief capable of carrying 3 times the payload of a US strategic bomber of World War II. The F-105 went through a few drastic design changes during the course of its life. Between maintenance issues, a high combat loss rate, and just the fact that the F-4 Phantom, the new American fighter aircraft, was able to carry more than the F-105 whilst also providing missile defense for itself, caused the F-105's reputation to be tarnished and for it to be pulled out of service early. According to Lou Drendel's book, the F-105 earned nicknames such as the Lead Sled, Ultra Hog, and my personal favorite, the Thud. The F-105 had a few design features for the requirement of traveling high speeds and low altitudes. First and foremost, the wing sweep or just the overall airframe design. You might notice the aircraft's very unusual shape from the beginning. Its tail kinda looks like it's been hit with a sledgehammer, and the front of the plane bulges and it looks like someone tried to vacuum seal the main fuselage about halfway down the body. All of these are an attempt at transonic area ruling. By distributing the total cross-sectional area as evenly as possible down the airframe, you can reduce the amount of wave drag produced at transonic and supersonic speeds. Combine this with a powerful afterburning turbojet and cooling scoops specifically designed for keeping the engine from catching on fire, the aircraft was able to achieve speeds and endurance unheard of at the time. As for the armament, the F-105 had 5 total hardpoints, a built-in M61 Vulcan cannon, and a multi-mode radar capable of both locking targets and functioning as a terrain-following radar, or TFR, and no, not the kind that appears when the president flies somewhere. The F-105F model specifically also featured 2 seats and an expanded radar homing and warning suite for the SEAD missions. On the Soviet side of things, everyone's favorite aircraft, the Su-7, was being built. Flying 1 year after the F-105, this aircraft has a unique quality of being potentially one of the worst aircraft to have ever flown. Alright, here's some quick history. The Sukhoi Su-7 was originally built with the intention of becoming a fighter aircraft, and Russia said no and chose the MiG-21 instead. Instead of throwing it in the trash pile, they decided to use the Su-7 to replace other failed attacker projects. The Su-7 had 2 things going for it over the MiG for attacking. That was simplicity and carrying capacity. Everything else just about sucked. It was inefficient, lacked agility, and had just about the longest takeoff run of any fighter jet ever built. The Su-7 kept up its poor track record with a poor avionics suite and a lack of standardized radars, countermeasures, or radar warning receivers, meaning that it was basically food for any AA or SAM system. This was okay for Russia at the time because SEAD required a very offensive doctrine which they did not have. But for us, that's a problem. And as much as I adore the Su-7, I can say with confidence that its shortcomings are catastrophic and that we will be trying to learn from this aircraft's mistakes. More or less, these aircraft ended with variable levels of success, the F-105 living on through dedicated SEAD missions with the F-105F, and the Su-7 being exported and sold to nations as a low-cost attack aircraft such as the ones flying with Egypt. Our craft, on the other hand, would be nearly a decade ahead of these vehicles we studied. Built with the intention of entering service in 1965, we would be timing the build. I had 48 hours to complete the airframe build, and every 4 hours past this time goal would mean an extra year for development, so let's try not to overrun that time too much. So we built the craft, and rebuilt it again. I couldn't get a shape I wanted for like the first, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 hours of this build. It took 3 major iterations and enough caffeine to fuel a small country before I actually got a shape I liked. Due to the period of development, I used many of the discovered aerodynamic rules of wing sweep, area ruling, and general supersonic drag reduction in an attempt to minimize the wave drag at sea level. Our goal was a minimum speed of 1.2 on the deck while clean, optionally without exploding. The wings were swept at an aggressive 55 degrees because moderation is for cowards. However, wing sweep this extreme comes with some minor inconveniences, such as making normal flight control under load a vague suggestion of maneuvering rather than a certainty. You see, as wing sweep increases, ailerons begin to lose effectiveness, or more so, a lack of stability. The span-wise airflow down the aileron causes an awful lot of drag. In a rolling scenario, the negative airfoil will cause much more parasitic drag than the positive airfoil, leading to a side slip against the axis of movement. This is a very real problem in real aircraft, and can usually be minimized by a good pilot with good rudder coordination. However, when the wing sweep increases, this drag becomes too much to handle sometimes, especially in a military aircraft where sharp turns would be a necessity. This can lead to unintended spins, and just general stability issues. Many planes of this time had adapted the use of spoilerons, or combined spoiler ailerons, to help balance out the drag, but this also causes issues. In level flight, the drag profile is much different than in a loaded turn, and it also adds design complexity. In this configuration, however, drag from the ailerons was a little bit more balanced, helping maintain better control of the aircraft for the pilots. The span-wise flow of the wing sweep also caused stalling issues, which led to the introduction of a singular wing fence structure just before the aileron to help with low-speed control, as well as an additional 2.5 degree anhedral to help balance whatever rolling forces may occur in the side slip. And then, finally, after enough revisions to make me consider quitting YouTube, we reached our wind tunnel test. Would it fly? Would it gracefully slice through the air? Or would it generate enough drag to make the F-4 Phantom's displacement look like an elegant whisper? Well, only one way to find out. Alright, according to our, wind tunnel, or just using my god powers to make the wind go Mach 2 somehow, we would need approximately 100 kilonewtons of thrust to hit Mach 1.25 at sea level clean, which I would be aiming for in my engine design. The engines were some relatively quote-unquote simple, single spool afterburning turbojet engines with similar thrust mechanics and dynamics to the General Electric J79. Well, I say simple, and while they're pretty simple in Flyout, there's nothing actually simple about these engines. From the fuel oil heat exchange to the variable stator vanes to prevent compressor stall, these engines are very high tech. Ultimately, they each produced around 55 kilonewtons of thrust at sea level, which I was pretty happy with because I knew as I continued to build the plane, more draggy elements would exist and we'd need more thrust. After that, it was time for said draggy elements. The VHF-UHF antennae, static wicks, transponders, landing, nav and beacon lights, pitot tubes, all that good stuff. And before I go on, as a quick disclaimer, radars, SEED, anti-rad missiles, and really any form of accurate combat doesn't exist in Flyout at the moment. And while it doesn't have an effect, we are going to essentially roleplay and model it to the best of our ability, starting with a missile advanced warning system in the tail of the aircraft to alert pilots of rocket plumes, and a radar warning receiver to help the pilot determine the position and frequency of a hostile radar. From that point, it was time to move internally and model these instruments to the best of our ability. Alright, you guys want to know why this video took so long? I'll tell you why. You see this gauge? This one right here? I spent an entire weekend, like 16 hours, trying to learn Euler angles and rotational matrices to try and math out a full gimbal for it. Like, downloaded the Lua mod, learned how to program in Lua, tried a bunch of different matrix equations, bothered the mod developer for a few hours about my dumb syntax errors. And then I realized if I just separate the axes, I don't need to do any of this, and you guys don't need to download a mod just to run my plane for a single cockpit gauge. Oh, and speaking of Melon Loader Unity mods, to build this plane I also learned how to mod using Melon Loader just because the Unity main camera is set up so poorly that I wanted to build my own keybind just to switch to my own custom settings. I'm sure this took no extra time and didn't impact my video release date whatsoever. Oh, and also every single gauge inside this aircraft is completely hand painted and built from scratch. I decided I needed to update my gauges, and I didn't really have enough good Steam gauges, so I wanted to just remake them all. And also, I can say with confidence, this is the first time I've ever built a cockpit that's 100% my own. 0 parts from anyone else, and 0 reused parts either. Anyways, functionally, as you guys know, none of the interior works. However, we'll be talking about it like it is, so that way I can explain to you the logic behind the cockpit. We built a custom radar screen inside the cockpit of this aircraft, semi-inspired by radar screens on the F-111A Aardvark and the F-5E Tiger II. This radar featured controls for distance scale, scope width, and radar mode for the pilot and the weapons operator in the back. To keep them from arguing for control like children over the last dino nugget, each knob, save for individual brightness adjustments and the lock cursor, featured a standby mode. My thought process here is that if the pilot puts his radar controls into standby mode, it will automatically update to the settings used by the weapons operator. Otherwise, pilot gets priority. So if the pilot has his radar set to standby and the Wizzo has his radar set to terrain following, each of their displays would theoretically update for terrain following mode. Of course, none of this actually works in game, but I figure I can at least explain to you why I labeled the radar in this fashion. The radar is an advanced multi-mode radar similar to those found on the F-105 and later the F-111 and Tornado. Featuring a ground scanning and terrain following radar, the pilot could successfully navigate even in IFR conditions, enabling all-weather and night strike missions. Furthermore, the radar would also feature an AA mode, enabling it to scan for airborne targets and threats. Lastly, there is also a camera mode, which activates a small screen to the right of the radar. This screen would display camera feed information from TV-guided missiles and bombs such as the AGM-65 Maverick or whatever fictional equivalent this aircraft might carry. Past that, all other standard flight instruments and controls were included, but we'll go over those a little bit more later. For now, let's move on to the missiles and weapons. One of the most crucial sources of combat effectiveness on this aircraft would be the weapons, in particular the anti-radiation missiles. This is what sets it apart from the Sukhoi Su-7 in the early models of F-105. Essentially, these missiles were designed to close in on a hostile radar site and use the SAM's own radar as a source to track the target, effectively using its own radar against it. In real life, SAM operators quickly learned to turn off their radars if one was detected, effectively blinding the missile. That being said, at this current point in time we would not know that, as these are a completely new technology. Later variants of anti-radiation missiles such as the AGM-88 HARM featured an onboard inertial guidance system to counter this. If the target was lost, the last position was stored in a memory bank, and onboard instruments helped the missile calculate where it was supposed to hit, even without a source of radiation. Due to the limitations of the time period and what the designers would be thinking, these large, slow anti-radiation missiles would likely not have inertial guidance, nor would they go particularly far above Mach 1.5, depending on launch angle and attitude though. Or just in general the energy of the aircraft. And that right there is exactly why speed is so important to our vehicle. Yes, low altitude strikes are good for evading radars, but greater speed means greater energy for the missile. The faster the plane can travel, the faster the missile can travel, and the less likely that the enemy radar systems will be able to evade it. Carrying just the anti-radiation missiles, we were still able to attain speeds of up to 1.15 at sea level. Were we to fly at altitude with these missiles, we could still reach just about Mach 1.98, just below Mach 2. However, anti-radiation missiles still don't exactly work in game. In Flyout, the game with no features and presumably no developer at the moment, there isn't exactly any form of radars and there's certainly no anti-radiation missiles. However, I can sort of trick the game into making them work properly for all like 6 people who download my vehicles after this. What I'm building here is the in-game model of an AGM-65 Maverick. It can track ground targets or air targets using its TV system from up to 40 kilometers away. What I'm saying is if I simply use the base game Maverick with a sleeve over it to change its aesthetics, I could make it look like an anti-radiation missile. Besides the fact that the guidance system is all wrong, there's another problem. The range of the Maverick is absolutely horrible. I could boost the range by putting a ramjet in the missile, but there wouldn't be a way to turn it on during launch without user input. To solve this, I took advantage of a unique in-game exploit. If you just take a ramjet and put it on backwards, it's supposed to generate drag. The thing is, engine drag, for the sake of saving calculations, is merely measured as negative thrust in Flyout. But if the thrust is negative and the ramjet is also backwards, that is a double negative, meaning it's actually generating thrust, no throttle or fuel required. Basically, we broke the game and discovered a new crack in drive just to make these missiles more immersive. Although, unlike last time we discovered a crack in drive, I didn't really have any involvement in this. It was actually the user Big Ham who discovered it and passed the information on to me for testing, so thank you to Big Ham for that. Otherwise, with a 30mm Gatling gun mounted underneath the fuselage, 6 Hydra-style rocket pods, 2 IR missiles, and 2 rather large anti-radiation missiles thanks to having to use the Mavericks model, we were ready to fly out. See you guys in the air. Alright folks, here we are for the live actual flying portion of the video. So as you guys know, I dedicated the earlier part, the introduction, to the cinematic. For the end of the video, I figured it'd be fair if I sort of, showed you guys how it flies. Seems reasonable enough. So for this portion of the video, I'm going to start by going through a theoretical startup procedure while we sit here at the ramps, cold and dark. Well, not cold and not dark, the engines are running. But we'll get there. It's because of the startup procedure. On the second monitor next to me, instead of being reasonable and having the recording software open so I can tell what's happening with that, I actually have my startup checklist open, which I'm going to go down. After that, after we're done with the startup procedure and taking off and all that, we are going to spawn a lot of vehicles around here. We're going to spawn 2 SAMs, 2 tanks, and presumably a target drone, but those guys like to fly away and fly out to simulate a target-rich environment. You see, I can't actually, in Flyout, you can't really control where the craft or where the enemies spawn. They spawn in an exact 30-kilometer radius at a random location, exactly 30 kilometers away from you. So I figure if I'm just on the airfield and I spawn them all there and then fly away, then we can assume or pretend like we are egressing into some sort of combat zone. We're going to use our anti-radiation missiles, our rockets, all that junk. Alright, I guess we should probably get started with the startup procedure. So this would be assuming that the aircraft is off and cold and dark. Unfortunately, there is no pneumatic cart or anything like that in Flyout to start up the engines if they stop, so for now, we literally can't stop these engines. So you'd want to start inside the aircraft, you'd probably have your canopy open and you'd have all your stuff out, because this is assuming the pre-flight's already been done, all that crap's already out of the way. Starting, you'd make sure that your seat was in position, seat is locked as number 1, AvMaster off, main battery on, and that would also be cabin lights for us, beacon light on, and then we go to the engine starting procedure. So starting with engine 1, if you want to use the pneumatic cart, you'd put the starter on, your throttles would be all the way back at idle cutoff, you would turn the starter on for engine 1, so the pneumatic starter you'd want left. Come over here, look at those gauges, wait for the engine 1 turbine RPM to reach 1000. After it does, you come over here and put the throttle up to 1/4 of an inch forwards. After the engine spools up, gets to RPM, you can turn the starter off and then put the engine back to idle. Then for engine 2, it would be the exact same thing. Now, these planes, they didn't have APUs, but they also didn't always have starting pneumatic carts to help with the engines. So in that case, what you do instead is they'd often have little charges to start the engine. And they were essentially just that. They were like explosive charges, shotgun blanks usually. And they would get the engine spinning. For that startup procedure, you'd want to start immediately with the throttle forward 1/4 of an inch and then press the combustive starter here, that little button for whichever selected engine. After it's, spooled up, then you would put it back to idle. That is probably a less preferred method to start the engines though, especially if you have the cart, because, I bet it takes a couple hours off the engine's lifespan every time you do that. As it throttles up and as the engines come back down to idle, you're going to want to come down and check the pressure, and you're going to want to check the voltage to make sure everything's in the green. From there, it's flaps raised, so we're going to put the flaps up. Canopy closed, which already is. Oxygen, verify normal, which would be told over here at the oxygen regulator section. Cabin air set, which cabin air is here. Then from there would be AvMaster on, which is up here. It's already on. Radar, confirm it's in standby mode. Stores is in safe. Master arm, confirm safe. Again, it's not. Landing hook is in. Destination select on the pre-programmed bullseye, which will be set before flight. Transponders all on. Radio, we'd want to switch to military flight service station, or in the event that we don't have that, we'd probably just have some other station, or we would just have all the information we needed for weather and flight service before the flight. Setting the altimeter, which we don't need to do in Flyout, it's just automatically set. Radio to ground frequency, transponder to altitude reporting, attitude indicator, which is these two guys here. We would verify them and adjust them if required. Turn coordinator, verify that it is correct. Where do I have the turn? Yeah, the turn coordinator is down here, which isn't working right now because there's a side slip, and technically because of the 4-knot crosswind. Countermeasures, you'd want to come over here and verify that it is in the off position so you don't accidentally launch your countermeasures. Then you would want, just before taxiing, you'd want to turn all these lights here on. The landing lights, the ground lights, and the nav lights. Your beacon should have already been on. And then after that, we are ready to taxi. Maybe do a little brake test as well, but... Alright folks, now we're coming to a stop here. We're going to be holding short of the main runway. The last thing you'd want to do is just the basic pre-takeoff stuff. Verify your heading indicator and compass are lined up, which they are. And then set flaps for takeoff. And once we get takeoff clearance, obviously we want to be on tower frequency at this point, but once that takeoff clearance is received, just roll out onto the runway and take off. Rotation speed in this thing is about 160, 150 knots, and takeoff speed is right around 160 to 170. It really depends on how much you have on the aircraft. So if this were clean, I would rotation speeds a solid 10 knots slower than that. Let's throttle up. Keep that nose wheel as light as possible. Looking good. We're not on center line, but that's okay. Getting closer to rotation speed, start deflecting more. There's rotation, 150. And take off at 160. Climb, positive rate, gear up, flaps coming up now. And that's just about it for the takeoff procedure on this aircraft. Alright, let me spawn all the crap and then fly away. I'll see you guys when I'm done with that. Alright folks, we're just about to cross into the radar's range pretty soon for the surface-to-air missiles. Again, it doesn't have a radar, it'll just magically launch missiles at me, but that's okay. We've got the 2 SAMs over here, 2 tanks over there, target drone there. In real life, we'd probably want to be using our radar warning receiver to figure out the location of the surface-to-air missiles and then locking our anti-radiation missiles that way, but again, that isn't a thing in the game. So instead, we're just going to press tab to turn the missiles on, and the magical square will automatically lock them for us. We've got a lot of range and altitude here behind us, so these missiles are going to go pretty dang far. I'm going to launch on each of them at about 70, 65 kilometers out. So starting with this guy, go my missile. Yeah, look at them. They're already hitting Mach 2. That's awesome. We gotta get a little bit close for this second guy, but we should have more than enough speed and energy to turn around and still evade whichever missile he shoots. Isn't this so much nicer than having to like fly super low altitude and dodge them at the last second and then still die because they have radar AA with guns too? Alright, missile number 2 out. Let's get out of here. There should be Flyout AA is a little bit hit or miss, but they should realistically be shooting just about now. It looks like we got lucky though, and they just don't care. Oh, nope, there's a missile. They just launched. Well, yep, the other one launched too. We should have more than enough energy to get away though. There's also a non-zero chance they may be trying to intercept the missiles themselves, which it doesn't seem like they're trying to do. Yeah, those missiles won't go much faster than Mach 2, especially, at least on terminal phase, because they're a little bit fat, as it turns out. Well, we're out of their tracking range now, so those missiles are just going to go up into space, maybe, and do nothing. Yep, those are not tracking me. Can confirm. That's one SAM down. And there goes the other one. Perfect. Alright, so now that we've taken care of their surface-to-air missile arrays, we're just going to go over to the target drone, shoot that guy down with our AIM-9s to show that we can, in fact, shoot down aircraft as well. And then we will attack their ground forces mercilessly with guns and rockets because they can't do anything about it. Alright, we're coming up on drone number 1 now. Got the missile locked, but we're going to wait to get a little bit closer before launching. 4K, Fox 2. Go get him, Tiger. And dead. Wow, that was completely anticlimactic. Alright, so little fun fact. Both of the tanks are completely without AA coverage now. Now, in real life, I'd imagine we'd probably be pre-flaring the approach anyways, but we don't need to worry about it. We can just attack them indiscriminately. I'm also flying low just in case there is more, so that way they don't get a sufficient shot on us. Although the flat desert terrain isn't very nice for that, so realistically, if some guy was like, you know, a couple kilometers that way, they could still probably get a shot on us, because the desert, as it turns out, is completely flat. Alright, let's throttle up here and get ready to attack this tank. A little bit boring, yeah. They've also got, you know, a giant red indicator over them, making it pretty dang easy to spot. Alright, interior view. Rocket pods selected. We're going to start with opening up with the rockets, and if that doesn't work, we're going to try and finish it off with the guns. Well, that was very easy. We didn't even hit him directly, but alright. On to the next guy. Alright, so as we call up on the next guy here, it's going to be more or less the same thing. Fly nice and low, avoid those AA, hopefully pop up and surprise attack him, kill him, then we're just going to go back and land at the airfield. How's that sound to you guys? Pretty good, right? Alright, we're getting a little bit close. I'm going to try and attack him directly with guns here. Alright then. That one actually did hit him directly and he was fine, so... I'll have the rocket selected, and I'll try with the gun to start. Oh, also our sights turned white. Isn't that wonderful? Well, gun test to start. If I can actually hit the guy. Nothing. Rocket test? Rockets work. Okay, cool. I definitely need to adjust that sight as well. I'll make sure to do that before uploading it for y'all to use. Anyways, yeah, that's everything. Let's head back home and just land the thing. Show you guys the landing procedure. Alright guys, we're kicking Live Messier out and going back to pre-recorded Messier, or voiceover Messier. While we're on landing approach here, I want to talk to you about the airplane a little bit more, and I also wanted to say thanks for watching till the end. Getting all the video content back in order and getting production back online has been particularly challenging after all my stuff got wiped. I didn't have any backups and I factory reset my PC after getting hacked, so you guys all can see how that went. Thank you to all my Patreon fans for making this video possible as well. I have their names scrolling on by right now. If you want to consider joining, just keep in mind I don't upload to my Patreon nearly as much as I should. And you should only be joining if you want to support my channel or maybe just see some of the exclusive unlisted videos. Subsequent videos from here on out shouldn't take nearly as long as this one did, so do stay tuned on my channel for hopefully some more uploads soon. As for the Javelin, it took us about 53 hours of in-game time to build it, excluding the cockpit. According to the goals we set earlier, that would mean this aircraft entered service in 1966, not too far after, only 1 year after the described and projected entry date. It'll make a fine addition to my nation's fighter force. Anyways, see you guys around. Thanks for watching.